We're not simply voting on a principle of choice, but on a hugely consequential piece of legislation that, yes, could put disabled people at material risk. But worryingly, it is also legislation that could serve to legitimise a view that a life like ours, one of dependence and of often pain, is not worth living.
Coming into Parliament in 2021, I looked far more favourably on this bill than I do now. I have changed my mind. Thousands of emails, hundreds of discussions have led me to believe this. Despite the very best intentions at the heart of this bill, the risks that it introduces are real and serious. And so, like many this afternoon, I say, don't risk it. Yes, at first glance, this bill appears focused and narrow. It sets conditions around mental competence, diagnosis of terminal illness, safeguards. But when you look closer, the scope is far wider than it seems. And that is one of my most grave concerns. Crucially, the definition of terminal illness in this bill requires no specific prognosis, no clinical expectation of imminent death. And this means individuals with conditions that may persist for years, even with fluctuating severity, could still qualify. This is not a safeguard, it's a red flag, and it carries serious, lasting risk. Some think in this chamber that there are safeguards in this bill, and it may look secure today, or it may be amended to make it even more secure. But we cannot look at this debate solely through the prism of the bill as it's written today and in the future, because laws evolve, precedents are set, judicial decisions reshape intentions, and no parliament can bind the next one. If we pass this law, none of us can guarantee where it will end.
The answer to inadequate palliative care cannot be deliberately ending the patient's life. Not only because we as a society have and should always consider life to be worthy of value, no matter the circumstances, but also because of inherent dangers that abandoning this principle poses to disabled and other vulnerable people. Because the truth is, there are no safeguards that can be put in place to fully remove the dangers that this legislation poses to disabled people. Whether it's explicit or implicit, disabled and older people will feel pressured to consider whether or not to keep on living dying is an option. It could come in the form of not wanting to burden loved ones with financial or personal costs for continued care. It could come in the form of believing that they are a drain on society and they are no longer seen as valued members. Presiding Officer, as I have said previously in this chamber, I'm only here today because someone came this morning to help me shower and dress. I can only function in this Parliament because my assistant is willing to give me personal care. I could imagine in a few years' time, hopefully a number of years' time, having some terminal illness and feeling the burden that could be put on my wife and my children because of the care that they give me day in, day out. To support this bill as presented is to roll the dice with the lives and dignity of 1 in 5 of the people of Scotland who have a disability.
This bill attempts to prevent all types of coercion. I believe it fails. Presiding Officer, I believe there are 3 types of coercion: active, passive and state coercion. Whilst the bill may try to prevent open and active coercion, it does nothing to prevent passive coercion. The lack of sufficient palliative care will make people think that the potential cost of their private medical care and that every penny they spend on that care is one less for their family. This therefore becomes a mix of passive and state coercion, thus inviting an early death, transforming the right to die into a duty to die.
I don't want anyone to be coerced into taking their own life. I don't want anyone to believe that they might be a burden to their family and feel a misplaced sense of duty to end their life prematurely. I worry that the medical profession is so divided and what the practical implications for the NHS will be, whether medical professionals can opt out, or whether training will be given to those administering end-of-life medication. And I have no sense yet from the Scottish Government whether this can practically be delivered or the cost to the NHS. There is too much that has not yet been scrutinised. I'm worried about unintended consequences of things we haven't even begun to consider. For example, the most recent briefing from Dr Annie Donaldson of Strathclyde University that raised the concern that abusive men would weaponise this legislation against a terminally ill partner.
The bill focuses almost exclusively on physical conditions, neglecting the equally crucial role that relationships, financial circumstances, home environment and social networks play in such a decision. Presiding Officer, coercion can be very, very subtle and difficult to detect. I am concerned that the Association of Palliative Care Medicine, who surveyed its members, palliative care specialists, found that 86% of respondents stated assisted dying would have a negative impact on services, and 81% considered that assisted dying would negatively impact recruitment to palliative medicine.
I do have concerns that many disabled constituents feel this bill could leave them vulnerable and feeling under pressure to take a decision. And a quote that I heard earlier today says this: "The change in the law may, for disabled people, seem more than a right to assisted dying, it becomes a duty."
It was very clear to me that including coercive and controlling behaviour within the bill as an offence was going to prove to be extremely difficult to prove, because it is very often subtle and it can be difficult to identify without the right expertise and detailed investigation. Individuals can very often experience it without even knowing that it is happening. I believe the provisions in this bill will make detecting it a very serious challenge. Individuals will experience coercion and pressure from others. No words on the face of the bill, no intent to prevent it from happening in the bill will stop it from happening. And given the stark consequences of this bill, I believe that is a risk too far. The bill will not just create a new option for a few, with everyone else in society unaffected. It will impose a new reality for every person towards the end of their life, the option of assisted suicide. It will, in effect, change life and death for everyone, and we should be particularly mindful of the impact this could have on some of the most vulnerable members of our society who lack agency in decision-making. I believe we can do better. Rather than progress this bill, the debate should be about how we can deliver the best possible palliative care, recognising that we all have intrinsic value, that real choice and autonomy mean having access to the best possible care, and that true dignity consists of being cared for until the end.
Of course, we would want to start with a tightly controlled and apparently well safeguarded scheme here in Scotland. But I was struck by part of the briefing from the Nuffield Trust, quote, "Of the systems we reviewed, we found no examples where eligibility became more narrow or restrictive over time. Some, such as Oregon and the United States, have remained relatively consistent. Among some systems where assisted dying has been legal for over 5 years, eligibility criteria have expanded, notably in Canada, Belgium and the Netherlands. Even where they have not, other changes in some places have made the system more permissive, such as the reduction of removal of waiting periods." End of quote. So that has to be a worry. However tight we make a system to start with, experience shows that it becomes looser and looser. This is not an easy subject. There are definitely arguments on both sides. Having free choice is something we all want in our lives, and that sounds like a strong argument in favour of the bill. Some figures suggest that 79% of the population support assisted dying. However, when we dig a bit deeper into these figures, and when some of the arguments and counter-arguments are put to people, we find that support can drop as low as 19%. What starts as a question of individuals' right to choose may not end there. It seems to me highly likely that there would be a drift away from this position of free choice to an expectation that individuals should not be a burden on wider society and actually have a duty to end their lives prematurely. This is not a position I want to see in Scottish society, and as a result I will be voting against the bill.
As the Scottish Parliament's first permanent wheelchair user, I am asking colleagues today to vote against the bill and to stand up for disabled people and others who, like me, are deeply worried about the consequences of legalising assisted suicide. I know many of you have doubts about this bill, and you are right to. If it passes, there's a risk that it will be easier to access help to die than help to live, and I cannot support that. We're not simply voting on a principle of choice, but on a hugely consequential piece of legislation that, yes, could put disabled people at material risk. But worryingly, it is also legislation that could serve to legitimise a view that a life like ours, one of dependence and of often pain, is not worth living. Like the many disabled people in the gallery and outside today, I've had strangers say that they believe that if, like me, they were in pain every day, if, like me, they needed to rely on someone to wash them, dress them and take them to the toilet every day, that they believe they'd rather not be here. Presiding Officer, some supporters say that it is not about disabled people, but by most definitions, someone with an enhanced and progressive disease, illness or condition from which they are unable to recover and that can reasonably be expected to cause their premature death is a disabled person. Regardless of this, though, what we and terminally ill people share is the reliance on systems of care and support to make our lives tolerable. And the truth is, colleagues, we know through lived experience, and I can tell you through lived experience, that the systems needed are just not there. So when people say this is about choice, I say I get that. But many people, because they're sick or disabled or even living in poverty, don't have choice or autonomy at the end nor throughout their life. Indeed, the life expectancy of so many is vastly reduced by poverty and inequality. We know that there are those who choose assisted suicide too because they feel like a burden on their family or on their state, or that they believe their life is intolerable. But, colleagues, what is intolerable is subjective. And although it is true that many people experience what they would describe as intolerable pain and suffering, it is also true that someone's judgment of what is intolerable is affected by what support is available to alleviate it. For that, we need good palliative care and we need good support throughout our lives. Neither are a given, as we've already heard today. Presiding Officer, as a disabled person, I'm lucky. I've been empowered in many, many ways. But even from a position of relative power, I experience discrimination and negative attitudes every single day. Some fights have felt intolerable. They've almost broken me. I've been ill, crying every day, and the pain from my advanced stage condition, which could result in my early death, has worsened because I've been worn out fighting. The moments that have caused me and many disabled people the most pain and suffering, though, have come when faced with structures, systems and attitudes that do not support us to participate in society. Like the fact that many of us have had our care packages stripped away, or that 1 in 4 disabled people don't get the palliative care they need, or that we're more likely to live in poverty. Or for me, it was when I was told my care package could end, or when I had to defer entry to university for 2 years because the council couldn't afford to meet my needs, or when I've been fighting everyday ableism and got so tired of it that I've come to believe the low opinions people have. It is in these moments it has felt intolerable. It is the internalised everyday ableism and discrimination that makes us feel like we can't go on. The extent of internalised coercion, the risk that we choose to die and that the state will help, is real with this bill. The systemic coercion that makes us consider for just a moment that we'd be better off dead. Legislating to make that happen brings the real risk that in moments when we're ground down, we wouldn't only believe we're better off dead, but the state could help make that happen. This is not hypothetical. We saw it during the pandemic. People said people like me shouldn't worry. But during the pandemic, my husband and I watched as the value of our lives and lives like ours were judged. And so scared as we were, We wrote notes to each other to say, please resuscitate me. It is inconceivable to suggest that the introduction of assisted suicide is about choice at the end, when so many people do not have choice throughout life. The safeguards are not enough, and we only need to look at the Westminster Bill to see how easily safeguards can be discarded when they encounter reality. Despite disabled people being part of some of the most regulated systems in this country, I can't even book a train without the state asking me why I'm going where. Disabled people are still more likely to experience coercion and gender-based violence. Despite multiple safeguards, regulatory bodies and rules on our lives, in the context of overstretched systems, it's impossible to accept that there could ever be certainty that someone has not been pressured into ending their life prematurely. The bill is the start of a slippery slope. Supporters already say the definition could be broadened. Presiding Officer, today I've only scratched the surface of concerns, but fundamentally, for me, it comes down to this. How can it be possible that people can make a free and equal choice to allow a system that oppresses them so much to also potentially assist them to take their own lives? Colleagues, I ask you to look to the disabled people who watch on from the gallery today and encourage you to think of them when you vote. And I say this, if in doubt, don't. If ever there was a bill that this applied to, it is this one. Presiding Officer, colleagues, rather than legislate to assist to die, let us resolve to legislate to assist people to live. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
For more great content, like, subscribe and hit the notification bell.